Look, I know we did the last episode without a sketch, but we've got a genuine professional actor this time, and a stand-up comedian. And everybody loves a sketch, really.
Do they?
An actor and a stand-up comedian? You've really blown the budget this time, Richard.
Well, not so much. As a card-carrying Yorkshireman, I hired Toby Hadoke because he's both an actor and a comedian.
And famously the nicest man in fandom.
What? Even nicer than me?
I'm not entirely sure about that. He's got some unusual riders in his contract.
Oh, hello, Richard. I hope you got hold of the blue opal fruits that I specified.
Well, about that, Toby.
Yeah, it's Mr. Hadoke to you.
Well, look, they've been starbursts for over 20 years.
Yeah, never been nearly as good since.
And I couldn't find any blue ones anywhere.
Well, you didn't try hard enough. Anyway, my agent tells me that in addition to the story discussion, you've engaged me for a comic sketch.
It's a bit of a tradition. Richard writes them.
Yes, and we have to pretend to find them amusing.
What's that?
I said they're all jolly amusing.
Yeah, well, it better be. I've got my reputation to think about.
You're playing the role of Guy Crayford, Toby. I've got you an eye patch.
Whatever for.
Well, I know how you professionals like a bit of method acting. Plus, the listeners will love it.
An eye patch. On audio.
Trust me, it'll be brilliant.
Oh, for goodness sake. Give it here. What's my cue?
He did nothing for you, Crayford. Absolutely nothing at all, except brainwash you.
That's not true! Try to keep it together, Paul.
You were hijacked by the Kralls, Crayford.
Nothing went wrong with your rocket, Crayford. You weren't even injured. Take off the eye patch and look for yourself.
What's supposed to be so funny? And why are you all wearing eye patches?
It's a homage
to that anecdote about Inferno.
It's funny because we're all wearing eye patches. I mean, one eye patch is funny, right? But I mean, multiple eye patches, they just get funnier. The more eye patches you throw into an anecdote, the funnier it gets. I mean, I'm not alone there, am I?
Yeah, I'll say it again. On audio, look, trust me, I'm a comedian. I've had funnier hospitalisations. Anyway, that's a terrible anecdote. It wasn't funny then, and it isn't funny now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably could have gone better.
There's only one thing to do now. Hit the theme tune. Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast episode 63, where we discuss a couple of Doctor Who stories about alien invasions that use duplicates. First we'll look at 4th Doctor story The Android Invasion from season 13, and after that we'll examine 9th Doctor story Aliens of London and World War III from series 1. And with me to decide whether they're fine representations or a crude copy of a classic Doctor Who story, we have a great lineup, headlined by our special guest, actor, stand-up comedian, writer, presenter and podcaster, Toby Hadoke.
Hello, how are you?
Hi Toby, and welcome back to Something Who, but of course this is your first regular episode.
Yes, well, thanks for having me. I've been trying to get fit, so I've been listening to you fellows on many a jog, and it's distracted me from the pain.
By inflicting yourself to a worse pain, your creaking joints.
Yeah, yes, I'm glad that one sort of pain is substituted for another. That's great.
I'm now picturing you like Rodney Hughes in this question. I can't stand the confusion in my mind.
Next up is science and astronomy writer Giles.
Hello,
Giles.
Richard.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Long time no see.
Yeah. So, have you got over the thrill of winning the quiz of Rassilon at the weekend?
Oof, blimey, high stakes. Yeah, I think we were just lucky that we managed to find ourselves at the table with some people who actually know some stuff about Doctor Who and have actually watched episodes since John's mission.
Yeah, there is that. And finally, writer, storyteller, and missing episodes expert Paul.
Hello, good evening. Welcome back.
Indeed. Okay, Brill. So, first up, The Android Invasion, which was written by Terry Nation and directed by Barry Letts. I can't claim that I haven't seen this one since original transmission. I've certainly watched it once, I think, during UK Gold repeats, maybe in the 90s, maybe in the early zeros, and then also I watched it with my daughter, I think, as part of we were looking through early Tom Baker. So I've certainly seen it on a couple of occasions, but nonetheless, it's not super familiar, so it was good for me to have another go at it this time.
Richard, did you pick it at random when you were looking for examples to show your daughter, or did something in the back of your mind tell you it was a good one? I mean, without giving too much away of your thoughts. Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why we watched it was because it was the one after the one before. I mean, basically, we were going through them in order.
What a prosaic reason. Okay,
yeah, and we got about as far as... I think this was the last one we did, because the next one was The Brain of Morbius, and I wasn't quite sure how she was going to take it. And then somehow we never got around to watching any more. But yeah, we definitely watched this one. So what about the rest of you? How did you come across the Android Invasion?
Well, for me, it's an unusual one in that it is one of the few where, growing up in a house full of Target books, because I have two older brothers, and then I started collecting them myself, the Android Invasion was one of only 2 or 3 that I held off reading because I then started to collect the videos. I encountered a fellow in a comic shop who had clandestine ways, and he had a direct route to, first generation copies from Australia of the Pertwees, so he got very good quality Pertwees, but he also had terrible quality black and white stuff, but I collected that first because I had this view that the longer ago it was, the further away from my birth it was, probably the world was a better place. Yeah. And then Super Channel had started to show the Tom Bakers, and I would never have had access to a satellite channel, but so I got, beautiful quality Tom Bakers was suddenly available. And so Android Invasion was quite an early one that I asked for because it was, to me, a blank canvas. I didn't know the story even, but I did know the received wisdom that it was, I think, to quote Doctor Who Celebration, an anomaly in an otherwise, gothic season. It had always come with a bit of baggage of being the one that was not as good as everything around it. So I went in with low expectations, and as we will discover, I was very pleasantly surprised, many, many moons ago, but I have since seen it probably an obscene number of times.
Giles?
I certainly don't remember seeing it on transmission, and so my recollection, I think I had the book before anything else. Or to be honest, the thing that sticks in my mind is I had the Weetabix card.
Oh yeah.
Before, so Stigron has always been quite an iconic figure for me because of those.
You're the person.
Second series Weetabix.
Yeah.
Weetabix cards, because they had quite funky illustrations on them of the corrals.
Yeah.
And then I had the book, and I definitely read the book multiple times. And I think it was a long time before I got to the... When did it come out on VHS? It wasn't among the early ones, was it? So I think I never actually got around to buying it on VHS. So I might have seen it in a video room at a convention back in the day. But I don't think I owned it on VHS. So it's probably really when it came out on DVD that I
Wow.
saw it for the first time in earnest.
Paul?
I've got no memory of reading the book, though obviously I did. But it was one of the first Tom Bakers that I saw out of contract, as it were, other than the ones, the late ones I saw as a child. Toby mentioned the clandestine methods. I've mentioned before that we had a little Doctor Who group at my school, and it was headed up by a chap who had contacts who could get him clandestine stuff from Australia and wherever. And this happened to be one of the ones that he had in his collection. I'm going to get ahead of myself because this chap, although he was obsessed with Tom Baker and Hinchcliffe and the gothic mode of Doctor Who being the supreme mode, like everybody was at that time in the 80s, despite that, he liked the Android Invasion. He also liked the Invasion of Time. He liked some of these ones that have gone on to be, for better or for worse, rather disparaged. Mm-hmm. So I was introduced to this is another great one. This is just as good as all those other great Tom Bakers we've been watching. You'll love this. And so you've got to bear in mind that's what I had in my head as I watched it for the first time as an impressionable teenager. And I have not been able to rid myself of this initial openness to the story, which may explain some of what I say later.
Okay. My main memory from 1975 is of Sarah at the end of episode 2. That's the thing that sticks in my mind of Sarah as an android. I don't remember much about the rest of the story, but that certainly stays in my mind from that period. Where do we want to go next? It starts kind of like a lot of Doctor Who in the 70s in a wood or, somewhat an obvious earthbound scene.
Through the ruins of a wood walked the ruins of a man. I mean, it's a Terry Nation. Watching it again the other day, and I actually really like the Android Invasion, and always have, because it was such a pleasant surprise to me. Although then when I did it with Rob Shearman for Running Through Corridors, where we watched every story in order, but also in the place where it was within the canon and, in quick succession, its flaws were slightly more manifest, and watching it episodically as well, suddenly you realise that episode 3 does very little, very slowly. But actually, the setup of it, Terry Nation going, I've got all these mysteries, and a lot of it's sort of fairly basic plotting. Why have they got new money? And there's actually no reason, when you think about their plan, why they overlook certain things. And the Doctor has his ginger pop, and Sarah goes, I don't like it, remember that for later. But it's all very niftily done, if you consider what the audience is.
Yeah.
I think it is slightly by numbers, but the numbers are all in the right order, and they're easy to count. And I think Barry Letts, who's never been my favourite director, actually does a really good job here, especially with the location stuff, where it manages to make beautiful summertime atmospheric, which I think is no mean feat, seeing as we usually associate atmosphere with darkness. And I think that it's really creepy, certainly the first couple of episodes, as the mystery sets up.
Yes, I agree. I like that mysterious part of it. I suppose there are mysteries in some other Hinchcliffe ones, but this is the one that's it's the most kind of, how do we understand where we are, what's going on. So yeah, I like that. I noted that we get away with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo on this occasion because Tom Baker stops at that point, unlike Celestial Toy Maker. There's this odd thing, though, where both he and the android just, walk into a thicket rather than taking the obvious path. I mean, I suppose the android's malfunctioning, so we'll let him off. But I don't know why the Fourth Doctor would think that going through the middle of a bramble thicket is the best way to get to the...
I think the camera crew are blocking the path, so that's probably the sort of explanation you're looking for.
Thank you, Paul. That explains it now.
Yeah. I think Doctor Who is at its best when it should be mysterious.
Yeah.
And the reason it's at its best when there's a mystery is because that fills time without padding. You can stretch a story. If you keep throwing mysteries in and resolving them at the correct pace, then you can fill several episodes before you then have to wrap things up, and you don't have to spin your wheels. Were you implying that the Hinchcliffe era has less mystery than other eras, that it tends to just get on, present you with something, present you with this week's Hammer pastiche, and then we just get on with it for 4 episodes?
I was implying that without necessarily having an awful lot of evidence in front of me. So if you can show me 3 more mysteries, then I'll withdraw the comment.
No.
I would say that in situ, though, any mystery is slightly undermined by the fact that in Terror of the Zygons, not very long ago, there were loads of people who were doubles of people that were actually people. There was a pub with a camera in the thing above the fireplace.
Yeah.
There are quite a lot of similarities.
Yes.
It's almost like they're going, we're at Terror of the Zygons +1.
Well, it does seem to have been a quite conscious decision by, apparently, Hinchcliffe. Hinchcliffe apparently liked Terror of the Zygons and said, yeah, more doppelganger action, please.
Seriously.
According to the production notes.
You sure he wasn't just covering himself?
Yeah, maybe he made it up afterwards. Maybe
having accidentally done Remembrance of the Daleks and Silver Nemesis in the same
exactly, it was a bit like...
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I feel sorry for Nation, because what he's done here, as people often say, is been forced to come up with a new idea. New for him. I mean, it's not that... Unlike after several years of just rewriting the same Dalek story over and over again, he's now come up with something different, and could have been justifiably pleased with himself if it wasn't undercut.
What I like, I think, particularly about this one, and the early part of it, is you can see that Tom Baker and Liz Slater are getting on, and they're kind of enjoying what they're doing. I mean, it's not at the expense of it being a good story and well acted, but there's a bit more rapport going on, and there's an interview on one of the Blu-rays recently where Tom Baker talks about Liz Slater and the relationship they had, and you can definitely see that that by this stage they've really gelled.
Yeah,
they're gold dust. I mean, the chemistry between the two of them is, they make expositional dialogue, dance and sing, and it's like it's like a little dance, a verbal dance between friends, and it's joyful. And she throws so many little sort of quirky little character moments into her delivery, and he can load anything with either a bit of import or a bit of sarcasm or a bit of testiness, and it just makes it all leap off. If your Doctor and companion are two such good actors who also have that kind of rapport, it makes the whole business of telling the story, which is really quite hard because you have exposition and ridiculous things to make sound believable, just so much easier. And I bet Philip Hinchcliffe thanked his lucky stars, that he'd got those two, because they're so good.
It's nice, and we've touched on this a couple of times beforehand, and I've probably sounded like I had this opinion that sometimes I say, oh, Liz's character is a bit too, it's almost so grounded and real compared to, when we then get Louise as Leela, and that there's this, that for me, that sort of sparkiness, it kind of elevates it to some extent for me. But this is a really good example of where I think they do gel very well. Maybe it's the setting, maybe it's the fact it's just that little one step away from reality, but it's kind of grounded enough to, it feels like Sarah Jane is relaxed. She doesn't have to be, it doesn't put her in any incredibly stressful situations where you're worried about her capability. And not as not as an actress, but when she's in peril, she plays peril so well that it's almost a bit stressful. Whereas you kind of think Leela can handle herself. If you know what I mean. Whereas with this, it's all that bit lighter. It feels, and so it doesn't have to go into that zone. It's great. I really like it. It's funny. I think I get the impression we're all of the opinion that we really like this. It probably won't stop us tearing into it later, but certainly in terms of considering this the general fandom consensus, or that long-standing one, that it was a bit of a duffer maybe in amongst all these fantastic Hammer pastiches.
Yeah,
it seems like we're all coming down on the side of this is nice.
I think it could only be two things. Partly that it's different. It's different to the others, which is not a fair criticism at all, judging it on what it isn't, and also a few plot points that don't quite work, which of course we'll come to. I mean, it's not exactly alone in Doctor Who on that score either, is it? And when the baseline for Doctor Who in this era, which is you've got professional writers being edited by Robert Holmes, and you've got Tom Baker and Liz Sladen bringing it to life, really, I think fandom lost sight of that, how lucky they were, and just had to assume that every season must have a duffer, something. It's almost like they didn't have the confidence to really enjoy and revel in the best of the best without putting something else down at the same time. I don't think you need to. I think everything in season 13 is superb television, and for my taste, this is better than Planet of Evil. But that's just an aside.
Oh, interesting, because I will stick up for Android Invasion, and I'll say I enjoy it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's any good. In the same way that I like fine food, but sometimes I enjoy a Kraft cheese slice with lots of butter in between two slices of white bread. It's maybe not the best bread, and it's maybe not the best example of cheese, but it's what I want at the time. And then we get into issues of snobbery, don't we? And we go, well, if it's entertained you, it's surely done its job. But I mean, if you were to simply boil it down to the plot, there are some genuine liberties taken with storytelling, I would argue, and Terence Dix has to kind of finish it off in the book, doesn't he? He does a couple of paragraphs where he essentially says, these are all the bits that aren't explained in the television version that I'll just draw a line under for you. I love Earthshock, but I'm not sure its plot is its key selling point, and you can have a story, Doctor Who or not, where it doesn't have to be that the plot is like a brilliant jigsaw for it to be entertaining. Sometimes you can have something with no plot that's well directed or got good performances that diverts you in a different way. But yeah, I would say that Android Invasion has that brilliant build up, certainly those first two episodes, but then certainly in terms of plot, it does sort of fall off the edge of a cliff, like Max Faulkner in episode 1.
Yes. Yeah.
Before we get to that end of it then, while we're still on the first couple of episodes, I'd like to have a think about the pacing of the mystery. And I don't just mean the speed at which reveals are eked out, but whether the mysteries are revealed and resolved in the right order. For example, everyone says that the big problem with this is that the twist is obvious from the title, the Android Invasion, which is a fair thing to say, but it's not quite true, is it? Because we're being encouraged to think even into the second episode that, well, the Doctor doesn't know what's going on, so we shouldn't be ahead of him. And whether if we are, is that just because we're coming at it with our decades of hindsight? I feel like even into the second episode, we could think that these villagers are real humans, are being controlled, mind controlled, which is what the Doctor suggests.
Yeah.
And even if we've seen the title, The Android Invasion, the androids could just be the figures in the spacesuits. So it's not...
Yes.
It isn't completely ruined by...
Clever little double bluff in that
regard. Okay, so that all works except for the fact that Max Faulkner, the very first person we see in the very first scene, is supposed to be a human, and he falls off a cliff and survives. So what's going on there? Have they undercut their central mystery for the sake of a good opening, an arresting opening visual?
But then they do that the attention to detail of when he walks past the branch that brushes across his face and it cuts his face, which is an effect. So they've gone, which they probably wouldn't have done if it had just been a guide. They wouldn't have needed to do that, but they've gone, we'll do that. And then people will think, but hang on, he bled, so he must be real. So it's sort of layer upon layer. But I think you could do the cognitive dissonance thing as well, sort of going, well, I sort of know it's about androids, but they haven't given me enough proof yet that these guys are androids. Seeing the pictures before I saw the story or knew the story, I thought the androids were the guys, the finger, the finger shooting guys. And you could think that any other sort of hypnosis or subjugation, that kind of malfeasance was going on Earth. Although, the very first thing they say is, I like that smell after a rainstorm. And the Doctor goes, well, actually, the ground's very dry. And you think, are you deliberately leaving clues for any time? But that's part of the fun, isn't it?
It's a tricky thing, isn't it? They're the sort of clues that I guess that's the sort of clue where you're supposed to spot that on a rewatch and think, there was a trail there or that they're designed for only the most intelligent viewers to pick up on, who can then congratulate themselves. But even so, it's a dangerous game, isn't it, if you make those extra clues too obvious.
You've also got the oak tree line at the start of episode 1 confirming it's Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the thing, that the twist is not so much that these might be androids that have invaded Earth. We might think we've just started in the middle of a android invasion of some village, and so what's going on? I think that the real twist is, no, this isn't Earth at all. The entire thing is a fake setup and a training ground.
That's what I say about there being layers of mystery. They're mostly triggered in the right sequence. But one thing I think I might have missed, and this is probably me, so I'm just asking you because you're all very attentive viewers. At what point are we supposed to realise, once and for all, that the humans are androids and not brainwashed people? Because I've made a note that midway through episode 2, the Kralls are just talking about it as though, quite openly, as though we're already supposed to know. It's not. Their dialogue doesn't suggest that this is supposed to be revealing it to the audience for the first time. So are we supposed to have picked up on it before then? Because if so, I wasn't quite sure where, and I would have preferred it if there was a clear moment. Anyone?
I think it's very decent of you to attribute such planning to. So halfway through episode 2, scene 2 is where I think we can start talking openly about the androids, because my plot of audience the graph I've drawn of audience acceptance and understanding, it's peak android.
Don't we all do one of those? This is Appendix B of any standard pitch, surely.
Yeah.
Right.
Sarah. So the android Sarah starts talking to the Doctor about android replicas.
Yeah, cunning double bluff.
That's about 10 minutes before the end, 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the end. So, but yes. The thing that I wrote down at this sort of point was the Doctor doesn't seem to work it out. It sort of comes to him in the end, and he sort of sees it. But he doesn't work out the mystery, I think, particularly, and I think mainly because why would you? Given all the clues that you get up to about halfway through episode 2, this is the least likely answer, isn't it? You'd eliminate everything else before you came to this one, because why would somebody create an Earth-like thing in the middle of a planet just so that they could have a go at seeing if they could invade it or not?
Yeah, why would they indeed?
Well, you mean it could have been that the first plan was just to make people like Ginger Pop first. Once they've made you like Ginger Pop, they will then make you like fascism, and then do it like that. That was their plan.
Yeah,
it's equally likely, I suppose.
Yeah.
Now, it's the end of part 2 that the Doctor reveals the whole thing, doesn't he? On a plate, he's worked out that these aren't real people, and this isn't the real Earth, and he gives us that all in one go, which is
we get
so that we're all up to speed
stuff,
now.
It's a lovely cliffhanger too.
Yes. And obviously memorable, as I said.
I've made a note. It's perfectly timed, this reveal, well written, but slightly undercut by the inconsistency of what's been revealed beforehand. That's what I thought at the time, but that was 2 days ago now, so I can't really back that up. Yeah, you launched straight in, didn't you, Toby, with the the fact that the identical coins and the calendar pages, they're nice little details. They're very arresting.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't bear more than a few seconds thought, does it? As to how they could.
I think whichever Kral intern they got in to sort of finish off the main architect came in and went, right, that's the cover of your calendar. Put some stuff in the till. In fact, not just the till. Make sure everybody's got some coins. This I go. Well, we could knock off early if we just do the same coins and just do the one date. I think
that's the only explanation, isn't it? It's like Slutty Barkfirst with his fjords. You've got somebody whoever did the woods. I mean, it's not like every tree has the same identical leaf repeated 1,000 times. So there's some things they put in an absurd amount of effort, and other things they've just clocked off early.
I suppose you could justify the calendar by going, they run the program, and then after the 24-hour cycle, they run the program again to iron out any mistakes they might have made.
Yeah. That's worthy of Terrence Dicks, that one. I like that.
Yes.
What's the other note I've made? While we're being picky, I don't know hammer it into the ground, but the Doctor points out the horse brass is made of plastic. But, I mean, are the materials wrong on everything? Or is nothing made of real metal or real wood? Is everything plastic? So why is it only the horse brass he notices? I don't know.
That's the problem. They do climb up a tree at one point, and you have all of that stuff going on with the bloodhounds and everything. And at no point until a convenient point for the Doctor to point it out, hang on, all these plants and things are plastic,
right?
Made of some fake material, which is
yes, presumably the water in the lake. So he takes a mouthful of liquid plastic when he dies, and that's why his throat goes hoarse. Because it's all little microplastic particles on his lungs.
I'm not normally the sort of person who gets fixated on details and things almost but not quite tying up. But something about this gets under my skin. I don't know why. I guess it's because if I'd written it, I would want it to be watertight. I wouldn't feel comfortable showing it to anybody else until it was, which may be where I'm going wrong.
Maybe the reason... I was just thinking about this earlier when we were talking about plot holes. I think maybe the reason we are possibly sensitised to them, put it that way, in this... is A, because it's a realistic setting, or a more realistic setting than it's not happening in a completely alien environment where anything goes, and also possibly because it's a clever idea, and we possibly want it to work on a sort of Moffat-y, here's a real steel trap of a plot kind of level, and you go, oh, isn't that clever? And then when you see it fall apart due to these little things that don't connect up, or sometimes big things that don't connect up, maybe that's why our discontent with it is a little bit more magnified compared to what happens on the planet Zog.
The thing is, it's constructed the right way round. It's constructed as a piece of television. It's constructed with details that create an impact on the viewer and make you think and make you wonder and make you go, oh, that's amazing. If it's not proper science fiction, it's built from the ground up. Something. It's not the physical world of the Kral plan isn't been built from ground up and make perfect sense. But who cares? Who would watch or read that version of it? So I'm not complaining. I just want to know. I mean, is it all plastic? Has any of it been grown? Is any of what's real and what isn't? Like you said about the water, the trees, the air. It's But I know that there isn't a better story to be told in there which obeys the laws of physics. I don't think. Maybe the other reason this confuses me is because it's almost like it was touching on something else I'm going to say later about what genre this is. I mean, the story is an Invasion of the Body Snatchers pastiche, right? which I was going to come on to. In Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the duplicates are designed to fool real people. But this village doesn't have to fool anybody.
No.
It doesn't need to be that... It's only the people, the androids, that need to be that realistic. The village doesn't.
Yeah.
So there's no real...
Yeah, but maybe they're method androids. And so you can't just dump them on Earth and expect them to do a convincing performance if they've not had a proper.
So what's my motivation?
Yeah, exactly.
So they are going to be confused by real calendars and coins that aren't quite so bright and shiny, and have that weird smell that old coins.
Well,
that
that's
have been in 1,000 pockets.
That's what's your motivation? It's to get to the 7th. Or whatever the next day is.
Yes, yeah, July the 7th. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other alternative would have been to take them to a church hall and sort of put sticky tape on the floor and sort of say, well, the pub will be here.
Oh,
and this,
don't. Oh, God. But the future companion chronicle there, I've got...
That would
but
be
also,
meta, wouldn't it?
I suppose the plan involving the pub is also dependent on the fact that the entire clientele of the pub are somehow in the Space Command Centre when Crayford comes back, because otherwise they're entirely surplus to requirements.
They do seem to be, yes, yeah.
You've got a lot of...
Yeah.
Scientists who like a drink, and vice versa. Locals who just free to wander around, top secret research and stuff. In fact, it starts off as just a generic space laboratory facility, doesn't it? And it ends up being a unit.
Well, there's a lot of unit in there.
Lethbridge Stewart has its own...
Yeah.
He's got his own office, so it's clearly unit aren't just passing through.
I mean, the other thing that I, mention of Guy Crayford, I think in the first 2 episodes, he's the one character I don't understand, because he becomes very homicidal very quickly, and I don't quite understand why he's so desperate to see the Doctor killed. I mean, later on...
Yeah, and then almost immediately he isn't again.
Yes, later on we get a bit more justification that he's... the Kralls have helped him and so on, but it just feels like his character's a little bit all over the place to start off with.
Well, I can forgive him anything because he is played by Milton Johns, who is one of the finest servants to Doctor Who that there has ever been. But nonetheless, on this occasion, I would say the hugely miscast Milton Johns. I mean, if I was looking around to cast a space astronaut, I think he would almost be bottom of my list. But he makes the contradictions of the character work because he gives him this sort of boyish naivety, which is, and that enthusiasm that he's got for Stigron's plan, and the sort of spiteful little wretchedness he's got about being abandoned and being saved, and as you say, he's in episode 1 he's shooting at the Doctor, and then he's sort of he frets a little bit, doesn't he, about doing bad things, but then he's got this, as I say, that the sort of boyish enthusiasm about Stigron's plan, but then he's a bit contrite, so he has to be all of those things without the script really giving him many logical leaps, sort of logical connections, and so Milton Johns does what actors at that time often had to do, which is just go, well, I'm just going to try and make it work on a scene-by-scene basis, and I'll give it some internal connection in my own head and see if I could just sort of carry it off. And I think he largely does because he's such a good actor. But it is a very odd piece of casting. But you can't take your eyes off him when he's on screen because he's such an interesting fellow. So I think it benefits from having him than it might have benefited from having a muscle-bound sporty type who would be perhaps more likely to be an astronaut.
And do you think we'd have got as you say, a much less interesting performance because Milton Johns is acting all that isn't in the script, and presumably what's there, rather than this genuine admiration and appreciation for and worship of Stigron, he's just supposed to, in the script, he's just supposed to have been brainwashed. There's no need for him to actually feel that. So would you expect a more?
It would just be boring, wouldn't it, though, if he was just rubbing behind his ear and going, the Kralls are marvellous.
A brainwashed human and an android trying to look like a real human would end up giving exactly the same performance. So, but not deliberately. I'm just wondering if that's a deliberate contrast, compare and contrast in the script, or again just an accidental. It could have been really interesting.
It does beg the question of why they didn't just take all of Crayford's memories and make an android of him.
Yeah.
Rather than this very contrived thing of pretending that he's been pulled apart and put back together, but to make their story sing, they've got, but we missed a bit. And I'm sure we will have lots to say about that moment in episode 4. But again, a bit like the setting up of the village to see if it works. There are all sorts of things that are done to set up a mystery, and then when the explanation comes, you do sort of go, "Are you having a laugh? Come on!"
Well, it was there with us in Doctor Who, and the new series is, I think, falls over on that score far
Well, don't they have a similar thing in Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS where the guy...
Yes.
Isn't it the opposite, that they tell him he's an android and then he discovers that he isn't? I think that's what I confess I've only watched that one a couple of times.
That's one more than me.
But I think that, I think it's the reverse twist, isn't it?
Yes.
That they treat him like an android and he realises that he's human. Which presumably,
and arguably with even less motivation for that than Stigron has, so far as I can figure out. It appears to be just a practical joke that got wildly out of hand.
But I'm afraid that doesn't forgive the android invasion for its egregiousness in this department, because it is a very silly thing to hang that element of the plot on.
I mean, so we've got mostly Invasion of the Body Snatchers, except only paying lip service to. We don't really get any of the atmosphere or of that kind of ooh. Craven has a sort of hint, a soupçon of a Manchurian Candidate about him, doesn't he, with the brainwashing? But again, not done in any depth. He seems to still be himself, have his own personality all the way through. He's not a sleeper agent. He's not waiting to be to be reawakened. So, as brainwashing, it's all a bit hopeless, isn't it? And the Doctor says he's been brainwashed, but
well, it's more like,
to what extent is that
to
true?
make him not lift the eye patch.
He acts. Yeah, maybe that's the only explanation.
It's more like Stockholm syndrome, though, isn't it? Except it's not even that.
That's how it comes across.
Because they're actually being somewhat nice to him rather than capturing him, per se.
And that would have been interesting. Would have been interesting if the Kralls were not just lumbering rhino men, but did seem like an advanced, intelligent race of benevolent scientists. Then they could have surprised us as well as him. Except the first time we see them, they're skulking around in their rather alarming-looking spaceship and cackling and stroking their horns.
The thing that absolutely strikes me as is an Avengers is, I was almost surprised to see that Terry Nation didn't write one of the several Avengers episodes that are quite like this, and they tended to be done by other people, because it's the whole setup, and maybe it's the fact, the sort of little home counties village and all of that setup. It just feels terribly like, right from the word go with Max Faulkner onwards. That's so much the sting of it.
Which ones? Tell us as you've done the research. Come.
Oh God! Now put me on the spot. I mean, and I think the Town of No Return is the one that's got the most, which is the first Emma Peel episode, is the one that I think people have tended to compare this to, particularly. But it just feels like a very Avengery set, or 60s spy-fi in general kind of setup that you could imagine this being it's a bit Prisoner-esque.
Yeah.
Although no one tries to escape, but the sort of heightened reality.
I think this could explain it for me. I think it's got so many influences. Terry Nation has soaked up all this stuff and put little bits of a dozen different stories in here. And that's why they're effective moment to moment, but don't all sync up or tie up at the end.
Yeah, exactly. It is all these brilliant moments, like the coins, the calendar, the bit with the bomb, where the landlord is standing blank-faced behind the door, just waiting for him to open the door, and stuff like that is, they're great things. But yeah.
So in terms of the story not being quite sure what it wants to be, and I'll file this under missed opportunities, the paranoid air and the invasion of the body snatchers there only really takes on a personal dimension early on when Sarah recognises the landlord. She knows the landlord doesn't know her, but we don't know the landlord either. So we only have her word for it, that it's a bit strange. So it's a tiny little mystery, and it's there and it's gone. Later on, of course, we get unnerving duplicates of our old friend Sergeant Benson and Harry Sullivan.
Yeah.
But not really until the point where we know exactly what's going on. So they save what could have been a really effective, spooky mystery for the audience until it's lost all its power. By the time they turn up, they have nothing to do but act in an obviously evil way because there's no point trying to hide anything anymore. I mean, it doesn't even have to start at the Space Center. Benson could be in the pub, for example, or Harry could be in the pub. It could be a good way of linking the pub to the Space Center. There are so many other ways you could have told this, and I think it would have drawn more out of that side of the story. But maybe there's too much for 4 episodes. Maybe you don't need all those little mysteries about coins and calendars and a village without a future and people we know behaving oddly. Maybe that's too much for 4 episodes. But I still think it's not so much a missed opportunity as it would be a missed opportunity if no characters we knew had appeared in the story at all. But the fact that they're there, but they're used at the wrong point in the story, I think is the real missed opportunity. Does anyone else have any idea what I mean?
Because isn't the first time we see Harry is when he's interrogating the Doctor, or is he interrogating Sarah? He's in the control center. He's in the disorientation chamber in the
what point's that?
In episode 2.
Yeah.
So, but it's not that Harry has lured anybody anywhere. Is it the android Harry hasn't been used for any kind of subterfuge?
No.
It's just, it saves having an android Corporal Bell or an android, somebody we've never seen before.
Yeah.
But they don't take that opportunity to have, Harry said, Doctor, quick, come and look at this. I found a thing, and then thwack him on the head, and then go, oh, it's not the real Harry. Curses. It's just like, I'm being interrogated by not the real Harry, and Harry's acting, like he did when he was a Zygon 4 weeks, 7 weeks ago. Don't give him a pitchfork.
If one was being charitable, you could say, that was why they didn't repeat that character beat, because they knew they'd done it in Zygons.
Well, yes, we've already done 75%. It would be a liberty. Exactly. It would be a liberty to go the whole 100%.
I think I've been a bit uncharitable because I suppose it gives it a slight lift in episode 3 when we arrive back on the real Earth, which is supposed to be sort of a slight reset for the story, and we get the reveal that the Doctor's too late when he goes to present his case to is it Faraday and who we don't know, of course. And Harry, and we get the slight creeping realization something's wrong, and the Doctor says, "I see, I was just too late." So that's a nice moment, but it's again, if that was deliberately saving the characters we know for that point, then.
But it's telling that you say that happens in episode 3 because it doesn't. It happens in episode 4 because not much happens in episode 3 at all.
Oh, I remember.
And so you've got the 2 episodes of mystery, then you've got the episode where not an awful lot happens, and then you've got the episode where there's way too much to happen to cram into the last episode. Yeah. And you almost sort of want to pull half of episode 4 back into episode 3 for the story, because it does seem like episode 4 feels to me like a sort of satellite to the rest of the story, a sort of this odd sort of coda where you suddenly meet a whole load of different characters.
Yeah, they're odd, aren't they? Yeah. And the Kralls almost completely disappear for episode 4. They reappear at the end just in time to be killed off. But
except for their whole invasion fleet, who we never hear from again.
Yeah. They give up quickly, don't they? The androids didn't work, so that's it. We're just going off now.
Yeah, you'd have thought they'd arrived just by momentum. Although I have to say, from a purely sort of fanish point of view, I remember being delighted when I discovered that Harry came back. A couple of stories later, I felt that felt quite realistic. That a companion having left would then nip in to be a guest of that. Because so often, it's like when somebody in Neighbours doesn't come back for a funeral or whatever because that actor's no longer under contract, and why would they bother coming back? I always like it if there's just that little sort of sprinkle of realism that the universe is not constricted by actors' contracts or refusal to revisit something they've just left or been fired from. So the fact that Harry comes back, even though he's not brilliantly used, I know that Ian Martin was not wild, that ended up being his final moments in the show. And I know John Levine is furious and it blames Tom Baker, who had absolutely nothing to do with it. But John's gonna John.
Yeah. Nick Courtney very cannily made sure he had something better to do.
Yeah. Yeah, they got in Patrick Newell, who I was horrified. No, I was quite pleased to discover, actually, when he was in The Avengers as Mother, Patrick Newell was 36. Now,
what?
Yes, he was.
Oh my God!
I'm told by some members of the profession that he was a committed dweller in the cups. Was Mr. Newell? So he was a committed imbiber. So that was 68 that he started as Mother when he was 36. So we're looking at so he's still younger than me when he's in the Android Invasion. Yeah. And I know I've been sort of I've had various slings and arrows etched into me by time and experience. But I feel when I look at Patrick Newell, I think, well, actually, I'm doing okay. But I remember when I was reading that Patrick Newell was in the Android Invasion, and it's only when he turns up in episode 4 that you go, oh no, he's not really in it. He's in one episode of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the sort of last gasp, isn't it, of the unit era, and it's a slightly odd one in that regard.
Do you think they cut down the Colonel/Brigadier's lines when they knew it wasn't going to be Nick Corney? Because it would have been very understated way for him to go out.
No, because they're spending. Patrick Newell probably cost more, and he gets top billing for his sole episode. He gets top guest billing. I shouldn't think he was cheap.
I don't know to be unkind, but he's by some way my least favourite pretend Brigadier. He's like a sort of crackerjack version of the Brigadier. He's just, but not in a good way.
Stigron, never heard of him. Yeah, it's very... stop that invasion, it's silly.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
No, you're right. I mean, he is the Peter Glaze version of the Brigadier or something like that.
Yes.
Well, we've got to the end, so I suppose we have to go back to Crayford again, don't we? And talk about the eye patch in the room.
It is one of the silliest moments in the entire history of Doctor Who, and there's some stiff competition. But the idea that he's never washed his face, or just take it, the listeners were not privy to the hilarity with which this podcast began. Is that I started the Zoom call or whatever it is we're doing. I was late because it's not a Zoom call; it's something else that I don't understand. But anyway, I had an eye patch on, and if you've got an eye, it's actually quite discombobulating and very uncomfortable. And I had to take it off fairly quickly because it's not an enjoyable... And also, you can tell you've got an eye. I'm sorry. If I wear a glove, it doesn't mean I've forgotten I've got hands. It's ridiculous on every... And also, it's not even... It's not that it's silly that he doesn't know he's got an eye under his eye patch. It's the whole convincing him that they've saved him by putting him back together because he's been and losing his eye. Couldn't they have just mocked up a photograph of them pulling him out of a hedge or something? Anything. It seems to me like a lot of the Kral's plans. Yeah. It seems unnecessarily convoluted, and its flaws manifest to anybody that thinks about them for about a second. Yeah. But I think Nation. I mean, there's a serious conversation to be had if you want to. My partner is somebody who campaigns to have more sort of disability representation on our screens. Yeah. And you could say Terry Nation has a wheelchair user in Dalek Invasion of Earth. Yeah. Guy, he likes eye patches. He kind of likes that stuff, and Germanic names as well. He likes stuff that's sort of cool from sort of war films and stuff. Be it, somebody that's got an injury or something like that. And it's all kind of window dressing to make, and it is the sort of stuff that as a kid you would sort of go, oh yeah, he's got an eye patch, or he's got a scar, or he's a wheelchair user, which made it sort of seem somehow more grown-uppy and boys-only. It's sort of it's the kind of furniture of the adventure story that is interesting to look at now through a modern lens. I don't get offended by it or anything. I get more offended by the fact that it's just really stupid. But I think it's there is an interesting grown-up conversation to be had about it if one wanted to.
It's annoying that it's so thoroughly botched, because the basic idea that the Kralls would do something so unethical just to win him over psychologically to their point of view is a nice idea. And if it had been done well, and there are 1,000 ways of doing it properly, then it could have been a really powerful moment.
But the thing is, I mean, everyone at the Space Centre, though, is cut from the same cloth as Crayford, because he reappears 2 years after they lost him, and they're delighted to see him. They don't notice he's got an eye patch. They don't comment on it. They don't say...
Well, no, they might have had training for that,
okay.
to not be shocked.
Yeah.
You know, they've had somebody come in and give them a talk about how not to
sensitivity training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't display your ableist bias if you are reunited with a long lost crew member and he's got a bit missing.
Splendid. About 3 decades too early. But the other thing that is, I mean, did he have food and water for 2 years? I mean, did they give him all that stuff just in case you get lost for a couple of years? We've got plenty of air, we've got plenty of food, we've got plenty of water. Don't worry about it, guy. You'll be fine. Because basically, as far as Sarah says in episode 1, well, he disappeared and they've given him up for lost. So and then he comes back and it's like, oh yeah, hi guy, great to see you again. You know,
and petrol for his rocket.
Indeed.
If this had been Malcolm Hulke, it'd have gone through some sort of psychological torture, proper brainwashing to convince him of all of that. They would have actually had him in a cell for 2 years, convincing him that he was surviving on licking the condensation off the walls.
Yeah,
yes.
He'd have also had
Ambassadors of Death stuff.
He'd have also had some really good scenes that were only in the Target novel.
and a middle name. He used to do. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
But we haven't actually talked about what we think of the Kralls.
Yeah.
I think that's quite telling.
Oh, I quite like them. Yeah, I like the fact that they don't just... You know, there's a lot of men in green suits with masks in Doctor Who, but at least they've sort of gone for some kind of the sort of gnarled, hunchbacky thing. They've thought about their body shape as well as the different face, which I quite like. Because, you know, we've all seen loads of series where, you know, people have got bumpy faces, but that's about it. So I like the fact that they've got that sort of element to them. I mean, it's not Roy Skelton's fault Zippy became famous, and Marshal Chadaki is reminiscent of that. And I like Stigron's death scene, you know, where he does a little bit of a backflip and then lands in the in the plague that clearly doesn't spread very far because it kills him and then runs out.
Yeah,
so
thank goodness for that.
They were going to have to. Everyone was have to get very, very close to each other to pass that one on. But it's still, you know, the green.
Never mind 6 feet.
It's a nice little for your climax. You know, it's a nice sort of stunt and bit of goo just to give it a bit of seeing as everything else takes place off screen.
That's Barry Letts for you, though, isn't it? He may not be, as you said, the best Who director, but he often puts in little extra touches that you wouldn't expect. Sort of things, you know. Quite often, whole stretches of it will not be as atmospheric as you might think you'd like them to be, but there'll be little moments which he adds in.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Mrs. Farrell's CSO kitchen. I'm talking about some occasional backflip.
I think the pub is very atmospheric. I like they do all those sort of shots of the different supporting artists in the pub. You know, when Sarah goes in, and the soundtrack is removed, so there's suddenly a sort of vacuum of sound. Is really impressive and works very nicely. I love all of that stuff early on.
And she does a nice bit of talking with them, you know, to sort of...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that particularly helps with the mystery side of it, that particular scene.
Yeah.
Because she's trying to sort of... to talk to them. You remember me, I came in here a couple of years ago, whenever, and nobody's behaving remotely normally with her, so I think that's quite a nice establishing scene, moving the mystery along. Talking of Stigron, it's a slightly jarring moment at the end of episode 1 when his face suddenly appears, because although on the one hand it's sort of saying, oh, there's a big alien in the middle of all of this. Maybe it's because I'm 54 and not 4. It didn't make me think, ah! I just thought, I don't know. I felt like after all that mystery, the sight of an alien face didn't necessarily work for me as the absolute climax.
I remember the first time I saw it being absolutely baffled that was the cliffhanger, because I'd usually read about most of the cliffhangers and knew what they were in episode guides, or I'd worked it out from it's every third or fourth chapter in the Target novel or whatever. And I remember watching that episode and thinking, oh, cliffhanger must be about soon, but I don't know what it is. And then you got a close up of Sarah's feet, and it pans up to the telephone, and Stigrod sticks his face through a hole in the wall. And I thought, I don't remember reading about that or that being a thing. And then the cliffhanger to episode 3 is Sarah talking about the G-force crushing her, but you don't really know what's going on particularly, and then it just doesn't. So so although the episode 2, which is more than a sum of its parts because the mystery is well established by then, but it's still a well orchestrated moment.
Very nicely done.
Is sandwiched by 2 of the lesser cliffhangers, I would say.
I think. Presumably you don't remember that cliffhanger from episode 1, because, I mean, it can't be the cliffhanger in the book, can it? You can't end a chapter with, and then we pan up. But little did Sarah know that it threw a hole in the wall behind her. A hideous face. No, I mean, not going to happen.
No.
There's a good cliffhanger, which isn't at the end of an episode. Doctor Who being tied to the village cross with a countdown bomb. He brings it back and makes it a cliffhanger in Destiny of the Daleks. But here it's just early in an episode and kind of thrown away.
Well, this is a funny thing structurally, because that feels like, to me, it just feels like you get a double thing. You get the destruction of the village, and then they have to go on the rocket to Earth. And given what we were talking about, the fact that episode 4's got too much to do and could use more room to breathe, and episode 3 is just immense, a lot of padding before you can get them on their way to Earth. It feels like, I think I'd misremembered. I had thought that the entire sequence of the escape from the exploding village involved them getting into the pod and then ending up straight on Earth. And then so I was slightly surprised that no, they run into a cave and then spend another half episode faffing around on Poseidon or whatever it's called.
I haven't seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers for a long time, but do the strange pods that our robots arrive in, our androids arrive on Earth in, is that anything like the pods that the doppelgangers grow in? Is that where he's got the inspiration for that?
Apparently they're a bit of a ringer for the ones from the original, from the 1950s version.
As far as I can recall.
That's more an assumption than a memory, right? Yeah. Good.
And the androids themselves, the other visual reference that's worth bringing up is, of course, there was all this. There was a sort of robot people, although with Westworld and the Stepford Wives as well. Had in the early 70s.
I'm going to really lose you all here because I almost think this could have gone to 6 episodes. Not because it's so good I want more, but because I think it might have benefited from more room to explore. There's so many different paths you could take with this, and if you could find a way. It may not be Terry Nation, that famously episodic thinker, who would do this, but somebody could find a way to structure all this material and pace the ever-expanding mystery properly. Then I think it could. And then you could do justice to the cameos from our heroes.
Yeah.
And a bit more justice to the Kralls, found out a bit more about them. I mean, you're right, Toby, they are an interesting... Is it a John Friedlander design? Is it one of his...
Yeah, I mean, I guess Ambassadors of Death, they managed to stretch the mystery bit out to about 3 or 4 episodes in that. But, yeah,
I'm not saying 7. I don't want 7. I don't want 7 episodes.
No. Don't talk crazy.
It feels like it could be a 4 and a 2, and then for the last 2 episodes you go to real Earth. But then you'd have to pad out the stuff on... You'd have to have a fairly wholesale rewrite of the stuff on Poseidon.
Well, that's what we're paying them for.
You would think, if you, as a viewer of the modern series, that and an observer of fandom, that Chris Chibnall had invented the idea of androids that couldn't hit a cow's backside with a banjo, and yet in this one we've got the very same thing. The androids are firing at Sarah and the Doctor for with gay abandon for several episodes and never get anywhere close to hitting them. So yeah, it's just an endemic feature, I think, in the Whoniverse.
People who've done research, is that finger loaded? An ad lib, or is that all built in? Is it designed to have loaded fingers so that the Doctor can say something in his usual charmingly disarming fashion?
Ooh, I don't know off the top of my head. I will have known this once because I did the DVD commentary on it, but it was a long time ago, so I don't know. I'm guessing it's a very Tom thing to have done.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of stuff being ad-libbed or worked out during the location filming, I believe.
I'm at the point where I'm going to throw in random things I noted down. Was anyone else remotely taken aback by the Kralls pointing out that the Doctor is known for his champion of libertarian causes? Is that just because the word means something very different now to what it did 40 years ago?
Yes. He's the Space James Delingpole, is he?
And the other thing that, in a different way, struck me as out of time, everyone starts, brief. It's very brief. But there's a little period in the story where everyone's going on very glibly about how the Doctor is a Time Lord. And that feels very unusual for this era. It feels very Eric Saywood, very 1980s, when everybody in the universe knows what Time Lords are and has an opinion on them. But surely for 1976, this is almost unprecedented. But the Kralls know, and they're even talking to... they talk to Crayford or somebody?
Crayford starts throwing it around as well, doesn't he? Yeah.
I mean, it's only an episode earlier where they don't even know he's even know he's an alien, and then suddenly, so that's odd. But I guess that must be a Terry Nationism, because Holmes doesn't normally, although Holmes of course has very idiosyncratic ideas on the nature of the Time Lords. I don't think he normally writes them as though everyone in the galaxy, as though favor them, does he?
We've got Morbius coming up in the next story after this, but that's a special case.
Yeah. And would have come from Uncle Terence anyway. Well, anyway, just thought I'd mention it.
It's not John Friedlander, by the way. He finished with Genesis.
Okay.
I guess we should probably try and wind up on this one and start thinking about the other. So what have you got?
Who knew there was so much to say about the Android invasion?
I just want to know what Paul was going to say about the Weetabix card. Because you said you were looking at the Weetabix card.
I just got it up. I've been staring at it, and I was going to say I can see why. Not a real one. If I had a real one, I'd be able to retire, wouldn't I? Probably. But no, I mean, I can see why you might have been attracted to them. But yeah,
I'm not saying that.
I got haunted by them.
I ate a lot of Weetabix in 1977. I'll say that much. And I discovered that if you got the 12 Weetabix, you got a set of 3 cards in that, the same as in the 24 pack. I think if you got the 48, there might have been something. But anyway, I insisted on my mother got the 12 packs because then we got twice as many Weetabix cards, even though that was probably horrendously expensive. But anyway, there we go.
I just remember towards the end, having to persuade my parents to get a 48 pack of Weetabix in order to get the game with the dinosaur in the middle of it, whichever one that is. Prehistoric Planet or whatever it's called.
I'm eating a lot of Weetabix at the moment as well.
Are you?
But that's just because I like the taste of them. I'm not getting any free gifts. There are Vogons in this set, and Hieronymus.
Right.
Yes.
Probably notoriously.
It was a very disappointing game, as I recall, as well. It was, it was like Snakes and Ladders, but without, the charm of Snakes and Ladders, really.
The Kralls don't look particularly menacing or threatening. They just look slightly contemplative with their downturned mouths. A bit disappointed,
I think the only other thing I was going to say that's related to that is because I was familiar with the story from the Weetabix cards and then the novelisation.
Yeah.
It was something of a shock to me when I finally saw one of the Kralls in profile and realised they had the rhino noses.
Yeah.
I never knew why everyone banged on about them being rhino faced.
Well, while we're I've just realised my first ever glimpse of the Android invasion was a clip of it, which was on Blue Peter or somewhere. Because I used to, every time there's a Doctor Who segment on Blue Peter, I'd record it on our early VHS machine. So I knew that short bit of Stigran torturing the Doctor with some top of the pops special effects on that torture bed. And yeah, from the front on, as you say, you can't see the nose. Well, it just looks like his nose is wobbling up and down, like they've glued it on properly. And for years, I thought, oh, what a shocking mask! That nose isn't fixed on properly. And what a trip down memory lane this has been. Those last 3 anecdotes we came out with were priceless.
Well, I mean, do you know what? The first time that I noticed that was about 2 days ago when I was watching that episode. I on both occasions when I'd watched it before, I'd never noticed. So yeah.
I guess this is why we won't get to see the Kralls back. I mean, one day a Doctor Who showrunner will be desperate enough to try to revive them and look more deeply into their culture. But we've got Rhino people now, so
Well, that...
What other parts are there fascinatingly distinctive?
Well, that and the Terry Nation estate, presumably.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, if you're going to pay above the odds, you may as well be doing so for a high-end product. So,
does that mean we're not going to get the Vord?
I'm afraid the Vord and the Kralls are in exile in the outer fringes of the galaxy. Yeah, having their horn and rubber parties.
Yeah.
Or the Ice Warriors version 1.0, whatever they were called. Yes, they were Ice Warriors, weren't they?
Oh,
Warriors in
yes,
the ice.
In
You're digging deep into Keys of
Marinus.
Yes, yeah. That's my Keys of Marinus deep cut.
We won't get any brain creatures of Morphotum.
Charles Daniels and Tim Burrows, if you're listening.
My final comment about this was simply that it's nice that Guy Crayford with his eye patch is in an office with Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart on the outside, so that both characters who famously have eye patches are in the same, well, not necessarily the same office, but a similar office.
If Barry lets Mr. Trick, he should have had him turn round in the chair.
Yes,
just as a nod. He would have known that was a joke that he could have done.
Yeah.
I think for me the conclusion of Android Invasion, and I don't think we've actually touched enough. I know we've covered it slightly on how brilliant Tom Baker is. I mean, I think every scene. I've just remembered when he wakes up from the interrogation. He goes, "Once upon a time, there were 3 sisters, and they lived at the bottom of a treacle well." I mean, it's all just. I mean, he just makes everything sing, and he's on particularly good form. I like his long, slightly greyer coat as well. But he and Elizabeth Sladen are just unimpeachable in everything that they do in this, and they kind of hold it together. But I don't think the Android Invasion is terribly good, but I thoroughly enjoy watching it, and so there. It's if I've got a Sunday afternoon to kill and I want to watch a bit of Doctor Who that I know I'm just going to thoroughly enjoy, and that I kind of don't feel I know as well as some of the others, I'll watch the Android Invasion and have a good time, and then go, oh, but don't matter, I like it.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to go straight into the other? Or do you want to have 5 minutes just to sort of, to stretch and move? What do you want to do?
Yeah,
1 minute.
I'd like to fill up my cup of tea, and I'm also going to stop this recording and start again.
We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, here's a clip from my other podcast.
Emily, have we got a podcast for our listeners?
You might want to try that line again, Richard.
What? Oh, yeah. Emily, have we got a podcast for our listeners?
You bet. Hello and welcome to If It's Hurting, It's Not Working.
Hello, I'm Richard.
And I'm Emily.
And we're your hosts for a new podcast about working.
Most of us have to work for a living, and many of us work for at least 8 hours a day and at least 5 days a week.
That's an awful lot of time in our lives to invest in anything, particularly if we're unhappy, bored or unfulfilled in our work.
So we're hoping that this podcast, being all about work, why we work, how we work and what makes a great job, will be useful to you all.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about what makes a great workplace and how we can turn things around when we're not enjoying our work, and perhaps in the end how we can all make our work a bit better.
So you might be asking yourself, why should I listen to this podcast? What do they know that I don't?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. And I guess first off, we'll say, here's what we're not. We're not selling you anything. We've not got any quick fixes or miracle cures. We're not consultants. And we're not positioning ourselves as experts.
But what we are 2 people who work and want to make our experience of work as meaningful as we can. And we'd like to share our thoughts about that with you. What's your greatest job that you've had, Richard?
So we talked a little bit about that, what makes a great job great and what makes a bad job bad. I mean, but often it's not the content of the job itself, is it? It's the stuff that goes alongside it.
Terrible jobs. Well, I've got a couple of them.
When somebody has belief in you, it's amazing how much more you can achieve, and what a massive difference it makes, I think, to your outlook and your output.
That's so true. Like having people behind you that believe that you can do it and support you and want to see you succeed.
What's the secret of your success, Emily?
The secret of my success would probably be my sheer determination.
So, Emily, do you have a dream job?
Wow. As a little girl, I always dreamed of being like Kylie Minogue. How about you?
I think you've got to accept with any job that there's going to be some bits that you love and some bits that you don't like so much, and it's kind of trying to get as much of the stuff as you love in there, and to get through the necessary bits that aren't quite so much fun.
I think that's my secret to success.
Hello, you're back, and we can hear you.
I'm back. Good. Okay.
Excellent.
Good.
Do you remember what you were saying?
Hello.
Oh, you're back.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, for some reason my computer decided to jump onto an internet network we don't have.
Oh, right.
Anyway, don't worry about
joy.
it. It's not John Friedlander, by the way. He finished with Genesis.
Okay.
Okay.
So here's something that you can put in for when... No, it wasn't. There we go.
Love it.
Can I have a wild track
Yeah.
of that, please, Tim? Well,
I'll do it more naturally. No, it wasn't. There we go. No, it wasn't.
Oh.
There you go. You got him.
oh no, you're right, because didn't he finish around about Genesis the Dark?
That's I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's just come back to me.
Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure. Those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan to cool a gypsy's lust. Take but good note, look where they come, and you shall see the triple pillar of the world transformed into a strumpet's fool. Behold and see. There we go.